Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, August 7th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The majority of Americans oppose the U.S. defending Israel. So the majority of Americans oppose the idea of U.S. troops being used to defend Israel if it comes under attack by Iran, according to a poll conducted by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs that was released on Tuesday. So this poll was conducted from June 21st to July 1st, and it found that 56% of Americans oppose U.S. troops defending Israel, while 42% support the idea. Support for defending Israel is stronger among Republicans, with 53% in favor, and only 32% of Democrats are in favor of U.S. troops defending Israel. The survey also found that 55% of Americans oppose U.S. troops defending Israel if it comes under attack by a neighboring country, so not much of a difference there. 56% oppose it if it's Iran, 55% if it's a neighboring country. So these results of this poll have been published as the Biden administration is vowing to defend Israel from an expected Iranian reprisal attack for the killing of Hamas's political chief, Ismail Haniyeh, and he was killed in Tehran, of course. A major coordinated attack launched by Iran and its allies could result in American casualties, and the U.S. support for Israel risks a major regional war, which would get U.S. troops much more involved. And, this is a real risk. If this is a big attack, there's a real chance here. We already saw some American troops get injured in Iraq just the other day. There's a real chance of Americans dying in the next, whenever this Iranian response comes. So, the Biden administration has promised to defend Israel, doesn't have authorization from Congress. There was no debate. Of course, there was no vote or anything like that. It really doesn't matter what ordinary Americans think about this risking a major Middle East war here. The U.S. defended Israel from an Iranian attack in April, which came in response to the Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. The Biden administration intervened directly to protect Israel. Actually, the first time they did that was when the Houthis started firing drones and missiles toward Israel, and U.S. warships directly intervened to intercept those. And then, of course, the Iranian attack was a much bigger scale. But again, they're doing this without any sort of authorization, just starting these new wars. Again, just no debate, no vote, nothing. Just war, war, war. And the Chicago Council poll showed that the lowest level... So they've asked this question as part of their survey every year since 2010. And this year marks the lowest level of support for defending Israel among Americans since they started asking that question. There was a few years where the majority of Americans said that U.S. troops should be defending Israel. That was in 2015, 2018, and 2021 that was the result. And it was 53% who supported that in those years. Other years, it was a plurality of Americans who said U.S. troops should defend Israel. But it's at its lowest level yet. And the Chicago Council, they published an article with their poll, and they attributed that lower level of U.S. support for Israel to what Americans have seen Israel doing to Gaza. The council said, quote, "The unrelenting Israeli attacks against Gaza have likely dampened American willingness to defend Israel, especially among Democrats," end quote. So something to keep in mind as we are charging into a potential new major war that most Americans don't want it. And I think it's, you ask the average American if they want a war with Iran, I think they're gonna say no. All right, so the next one here, Nasrallah vows a strong response to the Israeli killing of the Hezbollah commander. So Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah vowed in a televised speech on Tuesday that the Lebanese group would have a strong response to the Israeli killing of a high-level Hezbollah commander. Nasrallah delivered the speech during a ceremony that marked 1 week after the Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukr, was killed by an Israeli airstrike in the Beirut neighborhood of Yahya, along with 2 women and 2 children. Moments before Nasrallah began his speech, Israeli jets broke the sound barrier over Beirut, letting out sonic booms over the city, really just trying to intimidate the people that live in Beirut. It's a city that's populated by 2.4 million people. Nasrallah denounced the move as a petty provocation. So discussing what might happen next, he said, quote, "We have not sought escalations until now. We have been fighting in support of Gaza, but keeping in mind the Lebanese national interest. But an assassination of a top leader in the Dahiyya must be treated differently. Our response is coming, God willing, from us and the axis of resistance, and it will be strong," end quote. And the axis of resistance refers to Hezbollah and Iran and its allies in the region, the Shia militias in Iraq and the Houthis in Yemen. So Iran is preparing to respond to the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and the U.S. and Israel are expecting Iran's reprisal to be a major attack that will be coordinated with Hezbollah and its other allies. The U.S. has vowed to defend Israel, and Nasrallah mentioned that in his speech. He said, quote, "When Iran and Hezbollah spoke of retaliating against Israel for its atrocities, the U.S. affirmed its commitment to defend the Zionist entity. The occupation relies on the United States and Western countries for protection as it is unable to defend itself," end quote. So in the meantime, on Tuesday, the strikes across the border continue. Israeli airstrikes targeted a village in southern Lebanon, killing 5 people, including 4 Hezbollah fighters. Later in the day, Hezbollah launched drones into northern Israel, and at least 19 people were wounded, including 6 soldiers. The Israeli military said that most of the casualties were caused by an Israeli interceptor rocket that missed and hit the ground. So, the next one here, Putin asks Iran to avoid civilian casualties in its reprisal attack. So this was reported by Reuters. They cited their Iranian sources. So this account is not totally confirmed, but I thought it was interesting. So Russian President Vladimir Putin has asked Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to avoid civilian casualties in Iran's expected reprisal attack on Israel for the killing of Hamas's political chief in his political chief in Tehran, Reuters reported on Tuesday. The sources said the message was delivered by Sergei Shoigu, head of the Russian Security Council and former defense minister. Shoigu was in Tehran on Monday and met with the Iranian president. And then there was this other report from the New York Times that said Iran had requested air defenses from Russia in this meeting as it prepares for a potential war with Israel, and the U.S. For a potential war with Israel and the U.S., and that Moscow has already begun delivering radars and air defense equipment. So the New York Times, some other outlets reported that Russia is delivering new air defense equipment to Iran. This also, Russia and Iran have increased military ties in recent years, mostly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's a response to both countries being under heavy U.S. sanctions. But so far, neither country has confirmed that Russia is delivering any new equipment. They usually keep their military cooperation. They don't detail too much. So also on Tuesday, Brigadier General Ali Reza Elhami, the deputy commander of Iran's air defense forces, said that the Iranian military was in the process of upgrading its air defense systems, but added that Tehran is not relying on any foreign country. He said, quote, "We are 100% self-sufficient and we are not dependent on foreign equipment, and the security of our air borders is not dependent on foreign countries," end quote. So Shoigu said when he got back from Tehran that he did discuss the Israeli escalations in Lebanon and the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran, which he called a tragic event. So one thing I remember, I think it was in June, in like the beginning of June, or Putin said that a potential response to the U.S. arming Ukraine is him arming the U.S.'s enemies. So, and also, again, there is the growing military cooperation between Russia and Iran. So I wouldn't be surprised if Russia does, especially if things escalate, help Iran with certain military equipment. I can't see Russia getting involved directly in anything, but I would be surprised by that. But, military aid and equipment and things like that, I think is certainly possible. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. airstrikes pound Yemen as tensions soar. So U.S. missile strikes continue to pound Yemen as the Middle East is on edge, awaiting Iran's response to the Israeli assassination of Haniyeh. The Yemeni news agency Sabah reported 2 U.S.-British strikes in the Taiz province, which is on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the body of water that connects the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. So far, the U.S. military hasn't taken credit for airstrikes in Yemen on Tuesday, but U.S. Central Command claimed that it downed 1 Houthi drone and 2 ballistic missiles over the Red Sea. On Monday, U.S. Central Command said that they launched strikes in Yemen, and then a few days earlier, on August 3rd, they also announced strikes in Yemen. So the U.S. is still bombing Yemen pretty frequently, and the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, have not backed down in the face of hundreds of U.S. and British missile strikes. And this is a bombing campaign that started in January. One thing I should say is that the Yemeni media pretty much always reports U.S. strikes as U.S.-British strikes. That's because the U.S. and the U.K. started this bombing campaign together, but it's mostly been unilateral U.S. strikes. The U.K. has joined in when they launched like very heavy round of airstrikes. And so, this is, again, we're talking about, there's 2 clear sides here. It's the U.S. and Israel versus Iran, and then the Shia countries and militias and stuff. And the Houthis do control and have governed the capital of Yemen since 2014, and the areas that they control is where about 70 to 80% of Yemen's population lives. If you look at the map, they control most of the territory that used to be North Yemen, which the North and South became Yemen in 1990. Before that, it was North Yemen and South Yemen. So anyway, this is just a thing. I think a possible Houthi response, if they do get in on the Iranian attack on Israel, which I think I'm sure they're going to at least fire some missiles and drones toward Israel. But if they really decide to ramp things up, one possibility I think is to really ramp up attacks on the U.S. warships that have been intercepting their missiles and drones and stuff that are being fired around, whether toward shipping or toward Israel. And the Houthis have said that they would stop their attacks on shipping and on Israel if there was a ceasefire in Gaza. The U.S. has acknowledged that they probably would live up to their word on that, but still, continuing to support Israel, not putting any real pressure on them for a ceasefire, even though it would cool down all this stuff. All right, so the next one here, U.S. troops return to Kirkuk despite talks to withdraw from Iraq. This one is from the Cradle. So the New Arab reported on August 6th, which was Tuesday, that troops from the U.S.-led international coalition in Iraq have returned to the K-1 military base in the oil-rich Iraqi city of Kirkuk for the first time since 2020. An informed Kurdish source told the New Arab that the force comprised of about 40 soldiers and 10 to 15 U.S.-made armored Hummer vehicles. And they were sent from Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan to the K-1 military base. So this is the first time, again, since 2020 that U.S. forces are at this base, or they say it's the U.S.-led coalition, which could be some other international, foreign militaries, but I'm sure that there's U.S. troops there. So this could be, there's a few things here. The Kurdish source speaking to the New Arab said that it could be a response to increased ISIS activity in the region, but it also could be about kind of the reinforcements or the potential response to what's happening elsewhere in the region. And then the 5 U.S. troops were just injured at another base, the Ain al-Assad air base in Iraq. The U.S. is probably going to launch some airstrikes in response to that. So it could be related to that as well. And then this Cradle article mentions that the U.S.'s ally in Syria, the Syrian Democratic Forces, have released some ISIS fighters from those prisons that they run, very essentially gulags that they run in northeast Syria. And this could have something to do with the increased ISIS activity, as they freed over 1,500 Syrian ISIS fighters on the condition that they would not participate directly in combat against the SDF. So some movements going on in Iraq there. So the next one here, Hamas names Yahya Sinwar as the new political chief. So on Tuesday, Hamas named Yahya Sinwar, the group's leader in Gaza, to head the political bureau after the Israeli killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Before he was killed last week, Haniyeh served as the highest level Hamas official outside of Gaza and was the public face of the group as it engaged in hostage deal negotiations with Israel, although Hamas officials said Sinwar was ultimately in charge of the talks. Sinwar has been Hamas's leader in Gaza since 2017. He was in Israeli prisons for a few decades I think he was arrested in 1989 for some maybe a plot to kidnap Israeli soldiers or something. I forget exactly what it was. But he was in Israeli prison until 2011, and he was freed in a prisoner exchange. And he speaks fluent Hebrew, and he became the leader of Hamas in Gaza in 2017. He was reelected in 2021. Israel tried to assassinate him that year. And kind of since then, he's been like kind of a shadowy figure even before October 7th. And now, of course, nobody's seen him. It's assumed that he's hiding deep within the expansive tunnel system under Gaza. And Sinwar and the head of Hamas's military wing Mohammed Daif, they're said to be, the masterminds behind the October 7th attack on southern Israel. And Israel claims that it killed Daif in a recent airstrike on a tent camp in Gaza, but that has not been confirmed by Hamas. That was the strike that killed at least 90 Palestinians. They dropped very heavy bombs on the Al-Mawasi refugee camp, which was supposedly a safe zone, and they claim that they killed Daif in that. But again, Hamas has not confirmed that. Hamas officials said the decision to appoint Sinwar as the head of the political bureau was made unanimously. So the Israeli killing of Haniyeh suspended their indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas. In the weeks leading up to the assassination, we knew Netanyahu was doing everything he could to sabotage the chances of a hostage deal. And it's clear that killing Haniyeh was part of that strategy as well. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces kill at least 10 Palestinians across the West Bank. This one is from the Cradle, too. Another one from the Cradle. Over 10 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces in several areas of the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem in the past 24 hours. This article was published on Tuesday. 5 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli drone strike on Jenin on the morning of August 6th, coinciding with an Israeli military raid on the city. 3 other Palestinians were killed by Israeli army bullets in the Kafr Qud village west of Jenin on Tuesday, after troops besieged a home and opened fire at it. 1 Palestinian was also killed in occupied Jerusalem after carrying out a stabbing operation in the holy city that injured 2 Israelis. So there's a stabbing attack in East Jerusalem. 4 resistance fighters belonging to the Tubas branch of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement's Quds brigades were killed in a separate Israeli drone strike on the city of Tubas hours earlier. So lots of action in the West Bank. One of the people who were killed was a 14-year-old boy. But there's been pretty heavy, Israeli strikes and raids in the West Bank. And I've probably said this a lot lately, but another thing, if there is a big regional war. I think we might see Israel even escalate in the West Bank. Depending on how they do in Lebanon, they might have their hands full up there. All right, so the next one here. IDF soldiers suspected of abusing prisoner lied on polygraph tests. So this one is from Haaretz. So this is about the case of the Israeli soldiers who are suspected of raping a Palestinian detainee. So 2 of the 5 reservists still under arrest for suspected aggravated abuse of a Palestinian arrested in the Gaza Strip were found to be lying when asked during a polygraph test whether they had committed an act of sodomy on the detainee and answered that they did not. So they were asked if they committed sodomy. They said no, and then the polygraph determined that was a lie. Additionally, it was revealed in the investigation that the victim is not the commander of Hamas's Jabalia battalion. That was a claim that they made apparently, but he was a Hamas police officer. Among the soldiers who were detained is an officer with the rank of major, a commander of Force 100 unit, which is tasked with guarding detainees at the Sideh Timon facility. The soldiers are suspected of abuse under aggravating circumstances, of committing an act of sodomy under the circumstances of rape and violation of authority and inappropriate behavior. So the prosecutor said in the hearing on Tuesday that, quote, as of yesterday, all the suspects are distancing themselves from the act and aren't providing an explanation that sits with the objective evidence collected by the investigating body. This was a complex and long incident, not a short event. It lasted over 10 minutes. The evidence collected shows the suspects exchanged places and roles throughout the incident, and so we assume the deeds were done together, end quote. So what they're saying is that the Palestinian man who was raped so badly that I believe he couldn't walk. His rectum was punctured. He had lung injuries, punctured lungs, just really horrific. And they're saying this was a 10-minute thing that he was raped by these 5 Israeli soldiers. So just really horrible. And of course, this is the story that these guys were arrested. They initially arrested 10 Israeli soldiers. Some have been released. And there was the big protests, and the protesters included members of the Israeli Knesset and the government. We saw a member of the Israeli Knesset say that it was legitimate to stick a metal rod, up a Palestinian prisoner's rectum. I mean, this is really sick stuff that we're dealing with here. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. gives Ukraine $3.9 billion in budgetary aid. So Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said Monday that Ukraine had received $3.9 billion from the U.S. in the form of direct budgetary aid, which is dispersed directly to the Ukrainian government through the World Bank. The aid is meant to fund government services, salaries, pensions, social assistance programs, and other types of spending. It has also been used to subsidize Ukrainian small businesses and farmers. So these are some of the things that our taxes are paying for in Ukraine. The U.S. has provided tens of billions of dollars in direct budgetary aid to the Ukrainian government since Russia launched its invasion in February 2022. Shmyhal said that the $3.9 billion was the first package of budget assistance Ukraine received this year. He said that Ukraine's going to get a total of $7.8 billion from the U.S. in this form of aid. So these funds are being pulled from the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that President Biden signed into law in April. The legislation included $61 billion for the proxy war in Ukraine, including $7.9 billion for budgetary aid. The $7.9 billion was included as a loan instead of a grant. And this was an idea that House Speaker Mike Johnson got from Donald Trump. So it's a loan, but the bill gives the president the authority to forgive the loan. And there's also a mechanism to pay it back with the frozen Russian assets. So I have a feeling Ukraine's not going to be paying this back. All right, so the next one here. Mali cuts ties with Ukraine over support for al-Qaeda attacks. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone. at the Libertarian Institute. Very interesting story here. So Mali, the African nation, has severed its diplomatic ties with Ukraine following an attack by the local al-Qaeda affiliate on Mali's military. So late last month, opposition forces in Mali, including an al-Qaeda affiliate in the Sahel, which is called Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM is the abbreviation for that. So this attack killed scores of soldiers in Mali and mercenaries from the Russian Wagner group that is there in support of Mali. So Andriy Yusov, who is a member of Ukraine's military intelligence, said that the Ukraine shared intelligence with these rebels, which include the al-Qaeda affiliate. He said, quote, "The rebels received the necessary information which enabled a successful military operation against the Russian war criminals," end quote. An estimated 84 Russian contractors were killed along with 50 Malian soldiers. So that's a big attack. So Mali expressed deep shock over the subversive remarks and received the statement as an admission of Kiev's involvement in the slaughter of its soldiers. So Mali said that they were cutting ties with Ukraine. And Ukraine responded by saying that there was no evidence that Ukraine backed the terrorists in the attack. But you had the Ukrainian intelligence guys saying that they were involved, and that's something you see the military intelligence a lot of the time saying things, sharing information that you don't see from other parts of the Ukrainian government, like talking about how they've been trying to kill Putin or saying they've been involved in assassinations inside Russia. All right, so the next story here, Russia warns Ukraine that the cost for peace will increase. So Sergei Shoigu, who's the head of Russia's Security Council, he was recently the defense minister, but he was moved over to the Security Council. He warned on Tuesday that the longer the war in Ukraine goes on, the higher the cost will be for Ukraine to achieve peace. He said, quote, "Each day it waits to make this decision to settle the conflict results in the loss of control over another part of the territories that Ukrainians claim to be theirs, and more importantly, the loss of thousands of lives," end quote. So back in June, Putin made a public peace offer for a deal that would require Ukraine to be neutral, the lifting of Western sanctions, and Ukraine to withdraw its forces from the 4 regions that have been annexed by Moscow: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. At the time, Putin warned that if Ukraine rejected the proposal, the terms would change. So essentially what Shoigu is saying is the longer this thing goes on, the more territory Ukraine is going to lose. And that is, Russia is making gains, and that's more and more leverage for Russia in future negotiations when it comes to these territories. We've seen Zelensky discuss the idea of holding talks with Russia, inviting them to the next summit that he organizes, but there's been no concrete plans made, and we haven't seen any sign of the U.S. being interested in that right now. And electoral politics are going to, of course, trump ending this slaughter in eastern Ukraine. To Biden and Harris, it's more important that a peace deal does not impact their election chances. That's what they care about right now. And this is Biden's war. So they're not going to want to sign any deal that cedes territory to Russia before November. All right, so the next one here, famine in Sudan amid rising violence. So this article is from Arab News. I've been meaning to cover the war in Sudan more. It's a really horrific situation. Sometimes, people ask me why I don't talk about it more. Our perspective is, an American perspective, and we're non-interventionist, and so we focus on wars and conflicts and potential future conflicts that our government is involved in, and there's no shortage of that. When it comes to Sudan, we don't see the U.S. on a clear side. I've had people try to convince me that the CIA was on the side of the RSF, or that they were on the side of the Sudanese army, but it's just there's no overt U.S. support for one side. They sanctioned both of them when this thing started. Of course, that was their initial move. Just throw sanctions at everybody and see if that does anything. But anyway, so this is just about the horrific situation for the civilians in Sudan that are caught in the middle of this. So the UN on Tuesday described the humanitarian situation in Sudan as an absolute catastrophe. It said famine conditions have been officially confirmed in the Zam camp for displaced persons close to Al-Fashir, the capital of North Darfur, where one child is dying every 2 hours from malnutrition. Famine is probably also present in several other camps for displaced people in and around the city. So a UN official said, quote, "This announcement should stop all of us cold, because when famine happens, it means we are too late. It means we did not do enough. It means that the international community has failed. This is an entirely man-made crisis and a shameful stain on our conscience," end quote. So the UN says more than 26 million people in Sudan now face acute hunger. War has been raging in the country for more than a year between rival factions of its military government, the Sudanese Armed Forces under General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, led by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. More than 19,000 people have been killed since the conflict began in April 2023. So it's really, the famine is the real thing that could cause, hundreds of thousands of deaths, 19,000 killed in the fighting. I don't know if that's an accurate number. I'm not really sure. I think it might be higher than that because this thing has been going and it's pretty heavy fighting. But something you just kind of need to keep more of an eye on. All right, so that is the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Snyder. Look Who's Talking, America, Russia, Ukraine, China, and Palestine. One from Edward Hosbrook, Summer of the Draft, What Government and Think Tanks Are Planning. One from Caitlin Johnstone, Israel sure looks like it wants to prevent peace and start a new war. One from Mackenzie Knight, Firing Nuclear Missiles from the Pork Barrel. One from Orly Noy, Israeli leaders celebrate assassinations. So please go check all of that out. You can always support this show by liking, subscribing, sharing. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Comment if you watch on YouTube or Rumble. I appreciate everyone who does. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.